Yeah. Okay. So this is the new link. All right. All right. So apologies, guys. I have a little bit of technology issues, but I want to believe that my audio is okay right now. So if you're here and you can hear me clearly, please use the comment section so I know we are together. Yeah, once again, apologies for that. I had done a test run some few hours ago and it worked clearly. So I'm surprised that this time around decided to fail us. But you know, thank God you're back. All right. So thank you, Manuel, and thank you, Mazi Henry. Yeah. So I'm going to wait for a while. Since we had a lot of people join us in the other link, what I'm trying to do right now is to share the link so that other people can as well join. Um, because before now we had shared the initial link like across all of our social media platforms. So I'm sure some persons might still be on the former link. So we're going to wait for maybe three minutes, and then we can start proper. So where are you joining from? I would love to know where you're joining from. So Emmanuel, Henry, and any other person who has joined us here today. You can just drop in the comment section. Tell us where exactly you're joining this webinar from. Just need to get an idea of where my audience are right now. Okay, so we have someone from Illinois. You're welcome. You're welcome, Samidad. Emmanuel from Port Harcourt, Henry from Lagos. Okay. Onyedikachi from Nigeria. You're welcome. Haziz from Maryland, USC, I guess, or Maryland, Lagos. Eddie Connor from Lagos. You're welcome. Once again, apologies for the tech. Oh yeah, okay. Haziz, USA. Yeah, you're welcome. So apologies for the initial technical hiccup. I had done a test run before now, and I didn't know I was going to run into like audio problems. But thank God we're back. Jesse from Delta, you're welcome. Yeah, so we'll just give maybe one more minute before I go into the presentation. I promise you it's going to be for 30 minutes. So by 7:40 p.m. Nigerian time, we should be done with this session. From AB, you're welcome. Favor, you're welcome. Chuku D from Dortmund, Germany, you're welcome. So it seems to have people from North America, Europe, and of course, Nigeria. Right. All right. So it's 10 minutes after 7 p.m. Nigerian time. So I think we just kickstart the session. It's just going to be, like I said, for 30 minutes and we're done. I'll be talking about what US looks out for in a strong EB2 NIW petition, right? And I understand that some people here might not really even know what EB2 really means. So part of what I'm going to do is to spend the first 5 minutes explaining in detail exactly what EB2 NIW means, and then go ahead to explain or to talk about what USCIS actually looks out for in strong EB2 petitions. So the first thing is just to get this out of the way. My name is Martin Owokwe, and consultant and the founder of Mundus Consult. Mundus Consult is an immigration consulting firm. We help who want to move to the US via the EB2, the EB1A, and the O1A routes. Okay, so basically employment-based immigration petitions. We also help you open your proposed endeavor if you want to apply for your EB2. An RFE is a request for more evidence from USCIS. So if you have a request for more evidence from USCIS on a petition you've already submitted, we can help you with like drafting the strategy and the petition for that. I have over 5 years experience doing this, advising like international professionals on different US immigration pathways. Mundus Consult. So for the first 2 minutes, you're going to spend it talking about EB2 NIW. What exactly is EB2 NIW? Some of you here, I'm sure, must have heard about it. Some of you maybe have a faint idea of what it means. And so I'll try and do justice to that in 2 minutes. After that, I'm going to talk about the key reason USCIS denies most of those RFEs on those petitions and the patterns behind them. And the reason why I'm able to do this is because, like I said in the initial, the other slide, is what I do is immigration consulting. And so I get to talk to a lot of people who have either submitted petitions, EB2 petitions, or has got RFEs, and I've personally worked on EB2 petitions. So I have a lot of knowledge and context behind, because the thing is, when you submit or work on a lot of petitions and when you read through lots of USCIS decisions, you begin to see the pattern like behind all of those decisions, and that is what formed the basis for just to talk about what we've seen and what we think is a problem, just so you can turn in a better petition or a stronger petition that has a very high chance of getting approval. And then the next thing would be what does a strong prong 1 looks like. I'm going to talk about what prong 1 means, and then we'll look at prong 2 and prong 3 in details, and then we'll talk about some of the evidence that you can provide that can help you make sure you don't get an RFE petition. And then lastly, we can take questions if you have any. Okay, is that good? All right, so please use the comments section. So if you have any concerns, feel free to use the comment section to do that. All right, so first thing first, what exactly? Okay, so it's an employment-based green card or exceptional ability. You have a master's, you have a PhD, or you have exceptional ability in your field. The national interest waiver lets you self-petition or a labor certification if your work benefits. I think the key thing to point out there is if your work benefits the United States. So it's not enough to have an advanced degree. It's not enough to have proof that your work benefits the United States, which is because most people who apply for EB2 usually have advanced degrees. Like just having a master's alone is enough to meet that requirement. So for most people, that is not a problem. I want to do in the US is going to benefit. There are 3 things that you need to prove. The first one, which we call the prong 1, is that you need to prove that your work has substantial merits and national importance. Is that you have to prove that you're well positioned endeavor. And then the third one, it is that it is beneficial to the US government to waive the labor certification process. Okay. To explain it, or maybe later on in the slide, I'm going to explain all 3 prongs in detail. But this is just to give you an overview of what you need to prove to the US government for you to be given the EB2 NIW green card. And the matter of Danasa in 2016 has established exactly how USCIS reviews these 3 prongs. So why are we hosting this seminar? Why exactly are we doing this? I've noticed that a lot of people who are qualified, people who they've done amazing things, they have great plans, qualified professionals, they apply to USCIS denied or they get RFEs, especially in the last 1 year, since the beginning of this new administration, we've been seeing a lot of RFEs. Before an RFE is a request for more evidence. We've seen a lot of RFEs and we've noticed the pattern behind it, right? And then we've seen a lot of petitions that are too vague. And I think this is as a result of, the boom and the rise in the use of like generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Cloud, and the rest. So people think that they can just, they can prompt ChatGPT, get a response, package it, and send to USCIS, right? It doesn't work anymore. So your petition, if it's too vague, proposed endeavor is not well written, then an RFE. And then because of what we've seen, we've built or designed a framework, a framework that works irrespective of your field or your area of endeavor, and which is what we want to share with you today. And because lastly, we think that it's important that people get to know about this, because this process is very expensive, right? The amount of time and effort it takes in research is a lot of both financial and time investment for most people. So you want to do it and do it right. So what's the first reason why we think, or that we've seen, why a lot of petitions get denied? It's that the proposed endeavor is too vague for USCIS to evaluate, right? And this is an exact quote from an RFE letter that we've seen from USCIS. And they said the proposed endeavor is the record does not establish what the beneficiary will perform, with whom, in what capacity, or what outputs will be produced. Merely looking at this, or you would conclude that USCIS is looking. They want to see the exact thing you want to do, right? So some of the examples we've seen is someone saying, "Oh, my proposed endeavor is to," right? That's too vague. Like, how do you want to prove public health in the US? Yeah, we know public health is important to the US government. Yeah, that goes without saying. But what exactly are you going to do? Oh, I want to advance AI in healthcare. Okay, fantastic idea. So what exactly? Let's go down to details. There's no deliverable. What you have is just pure intentions. And with EB2 NIW intentions, having a good intention is not enough, right? Your proposed endeavor doesn't have any. There's no timeline to it, and you didn't name any stakeholders or partners. Okay, so what they want to see, one is that they want to see specific problem that you want to work on. Data from the US, most likely government data, or to confirm that is actually a problem, right? You need to name your operating model, which is also something that I've seen a lot of petitions. Public health in the US. How do you want to advance public health in the US? As an employee of a company? Do you want to advance it as a researcher in a field? Do you want to advance it as an entrepreneur or a business owner, right? You need to get that out of the way. Like, in fact, the first page of your petition should talk about your operating model, right? Because I've seen this a lot of RFEs from USCIS. I want to do this, I want to do that. How exactly do you want to do it? Do you want to work for a company? Do you want to do research? Or do you want to, start a business? And then you need to have a plan, like a 12 to 24 months phased work plan. This is what I intend to do in the first month. This is what I want to do in the 6th month. This is what I want to do after 1 year. And this is what I want to do in 2 years. It makes it more concrete if you have a phased work plan. And then you also want to talk about tangible deliverables. So at the end of my proposed endeavor, this is what I want to achieve, X, Y, Z, listed. And so they can, at the end of the day, let's say you're working on a methodology, or let's say you're working on a research, right? At the end of 6 months or at the end of 1 year, one of the things I'm going to get is I'm going to get a research published in a Q1 journal, right? Second thing is maybe I want to get funding from Department of Energy. So the tangibles, like deliverables, has to be clearly stated. And then how do you quantify success? So how do I know that this proposed endeavor has been successfully achieved? So those metrics, you have to clearly state them out. Okay, so in building a strong prong one And like I said, the prong one is basically where you talk about your proposed endeavor and why it is of national importance and substantial merits. Okay. So the first thing is lock your operating model. Clearly define that you're going to work on this as an employee, or a researcher, or an independent consultant, or a founder. Do not leave room for ambiguity, right? And don't fall into the error of saying, oh, I want to do this and that. So some people say, oh, I want to be an employee, I want to be a researcher, or I want to be an employee, I want to be a business owner, right? You just don't want to complicate things for yourself. So stick to one operating model, right? There's a caveat here. There's a challenge with going the employee route, right? Because one of the things you have to prove is that whatever problem you're trying to solve, or whatever proposed endeavor you're coming up with, must have broad impacts, right? It must have broad impacts across the industry, or even across the entire country. So if you're working for a specific company, you need to show exactly how the work you're doing for that company is going to benefit the country as a whole, or is going to benefit the industry, right? Which is where a lot of people get it wrongly. So I'll give you a typical example. Someone who is working for, let's say, a pharmaceutical company in the US, let's say Pfizer. Someone who is working for Pfizer and you're working in the development of a groundbreaking cancer medication, right? Even though you're working for Pfizer, the work you're doing for Pfizer is of national importance. Like, you can argue that it has broad significance and impact in the field. Because if you're able to come up with a drug that cures cancer or prevents cancer, then a lot of people get to benefit beyond just Pfizer, right? This is as against you, let's say, working for Amazon, and let's say you're working for an internal tool that helps with maybe HR for Amazon. Like, it will be difficult for you to argue that the work you're doing for Amazon HR, in this instance, helps the country as a whole. So you need to be very careful when you're choosing the employee operating model. You need to make sure that the work you're doing for the company can translate to like broader national impacts. And then the second thing, you need to state clearly what your problem statement is, right? And for those people who do research, like academic research, you know that in coming up with like a research proposal, one of the things you want to talk about is like the problem statement, or what exactly are you trying to interrogate? Why are you doing this, carrying out this body of research, right? So you need to cite like data. If your research if your proposed endeavor is like in healthcare, you want to cite data from like CDC or NIH or OSHA or Department of Energy or Bureau of Labor Statistics. You need to quantify exactly what the gap is, and you need to show that like with actual numbers or data. And then, like I said before, there should be a work plan, 12 to 24 months work plan. You need to come up with like a table and detail exactly what you want to do in the first month, second month, third month. That way they know your plans are concrete. And you need to have concrete deliverables. I talked about this already, and then quantifiable success metrics. Okay. And so this is what an actual proposed endeavor looks like, right? So instead of saying, I want to contribute to AI in healthcare, which is going to get rejected, you want to say, I'm working on validating sepsis prediction model, and I'm going to deploy this at 2 US hospital sites by the end of month 16. You see how specific this is? Instead of saying, I want to advance semiconductor reliability, predictive maintenance framework for FDC integrated and adopted as SOPs at employing fab at the end of month 8, right? Or instead of saying, I want to support public health infrastructure, you want to say, I'm working on an open source risk stratification toolkit that's going to document adoption at 5 US clinics. Like, these are super specifics, and you have timelines to all of this. All right. Now, for prong 2 and prong 3, because it's not enough to say, oh, I want to work on, I have this wonderful, fantastic idea. This idea is going to cure, going by the example I gave before, is going to cure, let's say, cancer. It's going to make cancer non-existent in the next 2-3 years. Fantastic idea, has national importance, has substantial merits, fantastic idea. But in the second prong, you now have to actually show that you're well positioned to carry out that proposed endeavor, right? So if you're, let's say, you're a data scientist or you're a software engineer and you're proposing that you want to do something around, cancer drug, right? The first question would be, are you well positioned to carry out this proposed endeavor? Like, what have you done in the past that shows that you have the capacity to carry out this proposed endeavor? Which is why your proposed endeavor should be clearly tied to the work that you do. There should be a linkage between what you're doing right now to what your proposed endeavor should be. So you want to look at your profile, your resume, achievements, media publications, scholarly articles you've done, invitations to come and speak at events, awards you've won, anything that you've done in the past that can show that you have the capacity to carry out that proposed endeavor is what you have to do in your prompt 2. So let's say you want to be, you're claiming that you want to do a research, right? You need to show that you've done research in the past. It might not be a research in that particular proposed endeavor, but if you've done the research in the past, like a successful research in the past, and you have publications to show or to prove that, it means that more likely than not, you are able to carry on with your proposed endeavor. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay. Please feel free to use the comment section if you have questions that you have. And so you want to map like each deliverable you have, publications you've done, projects you've worked on, or skill set that you have that proves that you can actually produce it, right? Also, if you have like expert letters from experts to corroborate or to support some of the claims that you've made, that would be fantastic. But caveat here also, having expert letters on its own is not enough to prove that you're well positioned. The purpose of an expert letter or a letter of recommendation is to corroborate the claims that you've already made in your petition, right? Supported by other exhibits. So when you say you're a researcher in this field, you need to show that you've actually published research papers, right? And so your letter of recommendation is to corroborate that you are actually a distinguished or an expert researcher in that particular field, right? And then the third prong is where, for a lot of people, this is usually like the easiest prong to meet, okay? Where you now argue that on balance, it is better for the US government to waive the labor certification process. And I'm going to explain this because it's a little bit technical, right? So usually when a company in the US sponsors you for green card, you need to go through a process called the labor certification process, right? Where the company would have to prove to the US government that they've tried to hire someone who is a US citizen or a permanent resident, but that they were not able to hire that person. Between 1 year, 2 years, for a company to sponsor you to NIW, you're asking the government to waive that process, right? Which is why it's called national interest waiver. So the government is waiving that process for you so that you can, get your green card in, a quicker and faster time, right? So the third prong is you arguing that it is in the best interest of the country to do that for you. And some of the reasons why, they can do this is, one, maybe because the work you are doing is going to link you to like a lot of companies, right? Because for the labor certification process, you are tied to only one employer. But with, the kind of work you want to do with your proposed endeavor, you have to work like multiple employers. Another one could be that the work you're doing is urgent, right? So imagine you're working on your proposed endeavor has to do with like COVID, right? And this application you were submitting this application sometime in maybe 2021 or 2020. You could argue that the work you want to do in the US is really urgent and that you can't wait for the labor certification process to be concluded, right? Or it could be that your discipline is you're in an interdisciplinary work such that you cannot be properly fit into a box, right? Let's say you can't just say, oh, this person is a microbiologist, right? You have like multiple disciplines, and that you don't want to be put into a box, or that you have like letters of interest or a letter of employment for someone who is ready to hire you. What are some of the evidence or documents that you need to provide? Because with EB1A or EB2 or most employment-based petitions, right, the bulk of your petition would be the exhibits, like the actual exhibits that you're going to support your petition with, right? So it's not enough to say you have wonderful ideas or proposed endeavor, things you want to do, you've done this. You need to provide exhibits, you need to provide facts. Whatever you're claiming has to be backed up by an actual exhibit. And so what are some of the evidence that you need? So I've been able to categorize them into like three different buckets. The first one are critical exhibits. Second one are like strongly recommended, and the third one are like supplementary. So the first one is, which is like the best kind of exhibit you can get, is letters of interest or memorandum of understandings from like hospitals, clinics, fabs, or agencies that you want to work with, like depending on what your proposed endeavor is, right? If you're able to get a letter of interest from, let's say, a government agency or even a company in your field saying, hey, I've seen or read about this person's work, and I think this person's work is going to be of benefit to the country, and we are willing and ready to work with him or her or partner with him or her in this project. That is fantastic. That's like the best form of evidence that you can get. The second one is like getting an expert letter tied to like specific deliverables. And when I say expert letters, I mean people who are experts in your field, right? Or in the field of the proposed endeavor, right? So you're not claiming the proposed endeavor in like cancer research, and you're getting your expert letter from, let's say, a professor of computer science. Like that doesn't make any sense. So expert letters are not necessarily from people who know you directly, right? In fact, if they are independent letters, like people who you don't have a personal relationship with, like it makes it more credible, right? And then the last one is like if you have publications in that field, that if you're a researcher or you have patents, registered patents that directly matches like your deliverables. For me, those are like the best kinds of exhibit that you can get. And then after that, you could get like federal government policy documents, which if you're very good with research, you can find some of these like online. If you know how to find stuffs on the internet, you should be able to get like federal government documents, policy documents, executive orders, proclamations, anything from the government that supports the work that you want to do and shows clearly that the work you're doing is of national priority. And then if there are like people who are citing your work, so if you're a researcher and people have cited your work, then that also shows that you're well positioned. And you also want to talk about that. And yeah, if there are prior tools or data sets that you've worked with in the past, you also want to talk about them. And then lastly, have you presented at conferences? Have you won like any competitive grants? Or do you have like media coverage? Are there publications about you on the media? And has anybody in the industry recognized your work? So these are some of the exhibits that you have to provide. Save them, email correspondence, screenshots, website printouts, certificates, PDFs. Like you have to get every single one of these things to support the work that you're doing. Okay, so I think some persons are complaining that the slides are blurry. I'm not sure why that's happening. I don't know if it's as a result of like internet connection, but part of what we're going to do is to, at the end of this session, I'm going to upload this to my YouTube channel. So you can go back to the YouTube channel to watch through, read through the slides, or maybe you can send me a message personally, and then I can share the slides with you. Okay. And then I think that's the end of the presentation. So I'm happy at this point to take in like questions. If you have questions, like no topic is off limits. So if you have like specific questions about your field, your situation, and you want to ask those questions, feel free at this point. I'm happy to do that for the next 5. Yeah, so the first question I'm seeing here is from EB, and it says qualifications or skills like master's degree. So like I said, for the EB2 NIW, the master's degree is like that's like the baseline, the bare minimum, right? If you have a master's or you have a PhD, you have met the minimum requirements. But having a minimum requirement is not enough to get it, EB2 approved. Minimum requirements, you need to come up with a proposed endeavor. You need to show that you're carry the proposed endeavor, and then you need to finally argue that on balance, that it's of the interest of the US to grant you a waiver. All right. So based on the partial ban, can Nigerians apply and get verdicts for EB2 NIW application? Yeah, fantastic with immigration right now. Like it looks like day there's a new regulation or there's a new policy. Just a few hours ago, there's a new policy memo that just came out that basically says if you're going to apply for adjustment of status in the US, so let's say you have your EB2 approved or your EB1 approved, or you get and you would most likely need to go back to do consular processing, right? Consular processing means you have to go like to an embassy in another country, interview, and then come into the US with your green card, as against just applying for an adjustment of status and moving directly from a non-immigrant visa to a green card, which is what a lot of people do. So it's a new. So every day there's just one new policy happening, coming up here and there. But to answer your specific questions, yes, Nigerians can apply for EB1, EB2. Nigerians can apply. However, there's a USCIS, meaning that when you apply for EB2 right now, you would not get a decision, right? It doesn't mean your petition is not going to be reviewed. It doesn't mean it's not going to be adjudicated on. It's going to be reviewed, and when they make a final decision, you would not know what that decision is. It's usually an approval or a denial, right? Withhold that until whenever the pause gets lifted, which, considering what is happening right now in the US with lots of like lawsuits, it's our thinking that the pressure on the USCIS to lift the ban, we get them to, actually lift the ban, anytime from now, because there are like lawsuits in the US, and almost every one of them, like they've won against the government. So it's only a matter of time before they cave in and they lift the pause. So go ahead and turn in your profile. But the reason why, part of why we're doing this is for EB1, EB2 petitions. These are very documentation, writing, and research intensive petitions. So it's not a petition that you wake up one day and say, okay, I want to apply for an EB2 petition, and then you turn it in tomorrow. It takes like months of planning, of drafting, of researching, and of gathering exhibits, right? So if, let's say, you intend to, this is for those who are outside of the US. If your plan is to move to the US next year, via implement-based routes, then you need to start now to start working on your petition. So you're not saying, oh, there's a ban right now, then I'm not going to start the process, right? You're going to start the process, get everything you need, and turn in the application if you're in a good place, such that once the ban gets lifted, you get a decision immediately. I hope that answers your question, Joy. Sammy that is asking, when pitch prong in recent time mostly gets the RFE. Yeah, it's usually the first prong, right? The prong where you have to argue that your proposed endeavor is of national importance and substantial merits, which is why I dwelt like, a huge part of this presentation on, explaining what exactly they look out for in the first prong. Chukud is asking, when should one consider? So I think it depends on your specific profile. And, I'm happy to do like, a consultation with anybody who is, in this call. A free consultation usually is paid for, but if you're in this webinar and you want to have a 10-15 minutes consultation with me, feel free to reach out to me or reach out to send me an email, and we can schedule a time for us to have a conversation. And the profile, I'll be able to advise if you should go the EB1 route or the EB2 route, right? So if I look at your profile or look at the work you're doing, and I don't think it's in the best interest of the country, like it will be difficult for you to argue that the work you're doing is of national importance or that it has broader significance or impacts beyond just one employer, then you want to go the EB1 route. But the EB1 is a little bit more elitist. One is higher than for EB2. From AB, so if one doesn't have these other requirements for these other visas, we can go with the F1 visa, like the student visa. So it's not an alternative or a substitute for the EB1. So most people who come to the US with an F1 visa eventually get to do EB1 or EB2 at the end of the day, because an F1 visa is a non-immigrant visa, right? And non-immigrant visas, there is no pathway from a non-immigrant visa to a green card. There's none currently. So if you're on F1, at the end of the day, you need to apply for EB1 or EB2 in order to get a green card. Or if you have a family member here already, or you have a spouse who is an American citizen, then you can go the family family routes. So basically, there are like three ways you can get your green card in the US. First is employment based, which is a company sponsoring you or you sponsoring yourself. If you are EB1 or EB2. The second route is family based. You have a father, you have a daughter, you have a son who is a citizen and wants. And then the last one is like the asylum process, right? Send me an email and then we can schedule a consultation. Yeah, just send an email at office@mundusconsult.com. It's on the slide. I can have a member of my team also. Can I have someone type in the chats my email address for those who can't see the slide? All right. So, in the absence of any other question, please feel free to follow us on social media at Mundus Consults on Instagram, on Facebook, and after before the end of today, we'll try and upload the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go through it, you can go through it on our YouTube channel, or if you want the specific slides, like the actual slides, you can send me an email and I'm more than happy to share that with you. Thank you guys for joining me on this session, and I wish you the very best with your immigration plans.